echo of oblivion. The city clock struck 8 in the morning when Ethan Miller first set foot in an old mansion on the outskirts of the small American town of Graywood. He was 28, a young architect who had just landed his first big job, restoring an abandoned building once known as the Hartwell House. Ethan loved his job. He had always been drawn to the beauty of old buildings, the cracked walls, the carved railings, the smell of time in the wood. But this time something felt different. As soon as he crossed the threshold, a cold breath of wind swept through the hall, as if the building itself had greeted him with its forgotten whisper. After a few days of work, Ethan came across something strange. While inspecting the basement, where he was supposed to inspect the old load-bearing walls, his flashlight illuminated a piece of brickwork that looked suspiciously fresh. After several hours of painstaking work, he finally cleared the niche. Inside was a small box covered in dust and cobwebs. Inside were only 2 items: an old, damaged photo album and a vintage pendant with the monogram H on it. Ethan didn't know why, but he felt as if these things were waiting for him. That evening, he looked for someone he could trust with restoring the photographs. The only person he could find was Claire Williams, a restorer of old photographs who worked in a small studio downtown. When Ethan entered her studio, time seemed to stand still. Claire stood at a table, bent over an old photograph. Her movements were precise, calm, almost sacred. The light from the desk lamp highlighted her pale face and her attentive gaze, as if she saw more than just the picture in front of her. Ethan briefly told her about the find. Claire studied the album and the pendant closely. "This is very old," she said quietly, touching the cover. "And the pendant looks like it was custom-made. See those initials? Maybe the owners were quite wealthy." She agreed to take on the job, but warned that the process could take weeks. Ethan nodded. He had no idea how much this process would change his life. The days passed. Ethan visited the studio more and more often to check on the progress of the restoration. Over time, their meetings grew longer. They talked about more than just photographs, about architecture, about art, about the past, which is so easy to lose in the rush of modernity. Ethan felt something more than just a professional interest growing between them. He liked her calm manner, her ability to notice small things, her smile that appeared only for a moment, when she forgot her careful boundaries. But Claire kept her distance. She seemed to live in 2 worlds, in reality and in the shadow of the past stories that she restored day after day. One evening she called him. "Ethan," her voice sounded excited, "you have to see this." On the table in front of her was the first restored photograph. A couple of young people in period clothing standing near the very building that Ethan was now restoring. In her hands the woman held a pendant, the same as the one Ethan had found. They studied the photograph in silence. "That's strange," Ethan said. "She looks familiar." "Maybe it's just a resemblance," Claire answered, but her voice was trembling. Days passed. With each new frame, the past became closer. In one of the photos, Ethan saw a face that made his heart stop. A young woman who incredibly resembled his grandmother. "This can't be," he whispered. She's still alive." But this photo was taken at least 100 years ago. Claire paled. She took another, partially restored photo. It barely showed a woman's face, and this time Claire froze. "This is my mother," she said barely audibly. "Or rather, she looks like her." They were silent for a long time. Fear and amazement intertwined in a strange mixture. Ethan and Claire began to investigate the origin of the photos. They visited the city archives, the library, and talked to old-timers. Gradually, a creepy story was forming. Once upon a time, there lived 2 lovers in this town, Eleanor Hartwell and Henry Miller. They belonged to different families, feuding over inheritance and an old agreement that ended in betrayal. Their love became a scandal, and, according to legend, Eleanor disappeared under mysterious circumstances. Ethan understood. Henry was his grandfather, and Eleanor, perhaps she was related to Claire's family. They returned to the album. The last pages were the most damaged. Claire had worked on them at night. Her hands trembled as she put the pieces of the photograph together, like a puzzle of fate. One day she noticed that in one of the photos Henry was holding a pendant, and only half of it was clearly visible. Then Claire got up and went silently to the closet. She opened a small box and took out the other half of the pendant. "It's the only thing left of my father," she said. "My mother never told me where it came from." When the two halves were joined, the pendant revealed the full coat of arms with the letters NH. The last photograph revealed the truth. Eleanor had been wrongly accused of stealing the Miller family heirloom. She tried to escape, but was caught, and later disappeared without a trace. Henry, unable to bear the loss, walled up their shared memories, the album and the pendant, in the basement as a promise that one day the truth would return. And now, generations later, it was their descendants, Ethan and Claire, who had found that past. That evening, they stood in the hall of the estate where it all began. Soft light filtered through the cracked windows, and the pendant in their hands glinted with a warm glow. "Maybe it wasn't a coincidence," Ethan whispered. Claire looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of pain, tenderness, and fear. "Maybe they wanted to use us to complete what they couldn't." He took her hand. "We won't repeat their fate." Claire smiled through her tears. "Then we won't let the echo of oblivion win again." From that day on, the Hartwell estate became more than just a place of restoration. It became a symbol of the restoration of truth. Ethan and Claire worked together, reviving the building, but at the same time, reviving what had been lost between generations. The past no longer frightened them. It had become part of their love. And when Ethan accidentally caught a glimpse of two figures in one of the restored mirrors, a young man and a woman, dressed like in old photographs, he only smiled. Because maybe Eleanor and Henry have finally found peace. And maybe it's because of Ethan and Claire that the past has finally learned not to disappear. Against a gentle instrumental background, the frame slowly fades to black, leaving only the words. Some stories never die. They're just waiting to be heard again.